I am Professor of Digital Transformation Design, and I am Academic Lead for Connected Futures, which is one of the 5 research themes at the University of Brighton. And I also lead the Brighton Digital Catapult Centre. And my expertise are in designing for persuasion, emotion and trust. And for me, in this context, trust is not transparency. Trust is an emotion felt by the user, and transparency is perhaps a policy issue. So just for the sake of this discussion. The phrase PET comes from a guy called Schaefer in 2009 who talked about the next wave in web design. So this is 10 years ago, talking about how the next wave in web design is persuasive design. While usability is still a fundamental requirement, it is no longer enough. So this is 10 years ago that somebody was actually giving this a phrase. So it's about how the user feels. For example, PayPal recently found out that promoting speed is more emotionally appealing than information security for the customers. So there's a huge ethical decision straight away there, which you might not be in a position to question. It's a business decision. The future of great web design is about creating engagement and commitment in a way that clearly impacts business results and measurable goals. I do not work for the dark side, which is why I'm in academia and not a millionaire. But there are a lot of, it's a complex topic. So if we can just take the lid off it tonight, rather than try and answer anything, I think that would be an important achievement. But good UX and digital transformation is about engaging end users to motivate people to make decisions that lead to some sort of conversion. There's a lot of evidence going back a couple of decades that consumers make decisions based on emotion. Now, I am 50 in July. I struggle to say that, but I'm going to start saying it. So I'm old school, Generation X, lefty. I do not trust the media. I do not trust the government. I assume that there are international systems at work, however hidden or not they may be. I gave a paper at the British Computer Society in 2011 talking about how we were all creating a digital exoskeleton of our thoughts and feelings through all our digital behaviour. I gave a paper in Havana in 2014 suggesting the methodologies that could have been used to nudge the Arab Spring through social media. Because for me, I did my first website 25 years ago and my first touch screen 25 years ago. It is absolutely transparent to me that social media is being used to change individual and collective behaviours. And for that reason, if you Google me, you will only find work-related activity, because I never for one moment, being old school, thought I should put private information on a public network drive. So that is my advice, which may be closing the door after the horse has bolted. My kids are knackered on that front because they don't believe mum. But the fact remains, any information you give away on a public network drive is no longer your information. And I'm not convinced that GDPR has got the rigour, because we need to police this algorithmically, and we actually can't write algorithms that can do a lot of this yet. But some of us are working on it. Anyway, so we've known for a very long time through advertising and marketing that it is emotions that drive people to make decisions. And this guy, who's got a very prestigious role at Harvard, leading the Mind, Brain and Behaviour Initiative, argues rigorously in academic papers that 95% of decisions are made at the non-conscious level. So emotions play a critical role in decision making. That's another guy with a fantastic job title, far cleverer than I am and far more specialised than I am. But he's found in his research that patients with damage to emotional parts of the brain cannot make decisions, despite their IQ results coming out exactly the same. So we're now delving into the realm of instinct and prejudice and emotion and reaction. So we're working in a murky area whenever we're trying to engage anyone and change their decision-making process. In fact, what I'm doing right now is persuading you to believe me. So it happens all the time. In cognitive neuroscience, there's something called dual process theory, which is really useful. The notion that there's it's like old left brain and right brain, but of course it isn't left and right. It's known as System 1 and System 2, implicit and explicit. And normally when we do user testing, we say to people, so how did you feel about that then? And they go, oh yeah, like if they've had a good day. I thought everything was shit when I walked in here because I was boiling hot and I got trapped on the circle line. So we get reported responses. And I would argue that reported responses have very little value. Implicit responses are things that happen to people before they report. So if you're a good communicator, you can read a person or you can read an audience and you can sense on a microcosmic level what the reception is to what you're saying. And it is all this. It's your lizard brain that is engaged in making decisions before you even know you're making the decisions. That's the bad news. So persuasion, emotion and trust research needs to measure the reaction before traditional research, user testing research. If I can say, do you believe in a multicultural Britain? And the user will go, yeah, I do. Really? Or is that because of the people you're in front of, or who you're speaking to, or how you think you might be received? This is a reported response. So for me, in user testing, I'm not really interested in reported responses. So how do we measure the non-conscious, non-articulated, and precognitive responses? Because if we can, and the answer is it gets worse, doesn't it? We wire people up. Bear with me, I haven't finished. But yeah, I wire people up. So it's actually a sort of technologically more rich seam than eye tracking, and it comes out of that tradition of using things like eye tracking to get biometric insights into behavioural responses in the development cycle. So biometric tools capture how people think and feel, or they'll think, let's put that in inverted commas, it captures how people feel, as opposed to System 2 measuring, which is what people say. So the most effective research involves actually measuring both and getting, because I don't know if you all know this, but of course the more inputs you get, the bigger matrix of sources you get to try and understand what you're trying to understand. So here's an example, which is a simple route into my research, which is from Neuromarketing. So this really is the dark side now. It's from a company I worked with a few years ago called Seren, who were then bought by EY. And this is one of their presentations about neuroscientific testing of ads and emails. So we're typically not aware of non-conscious emotional influences. Thinking about our feelings and emotions changes them. Now, this absolutely fascinates me. The minute you start to process your instinctive response, you're in dialogue with yourself, and so things start to evolve. And traditional research suffers from a lot of data noise, from differences in people's way of expressing themselves, different ways of reflecting on yourself, different ways of communicating. And unavoidably, such responses are filtered and distorted by the act of reflecting and sharing them with the facilitator. But biometric techniques can measure the response before the brain engages in a post-rationalizing way. So I've been working with a EEG brain-computer interface for about 9 years called Emotiv. And when I first started working with it at Kingston University, it was 10 grand. I bought one 2 years ago. It's $800, which is sort of good news for me. But it also means that lots of things that this is the state of play in the tech sector. Lots of things we don't really understand are on the market, and any of us can do anything with them. So anyway, the Emotiv, I do not say that what I do is science. I'm a designer, I'm a UX designer, and all I'm interested in is actionable insights in the development cycle. This is not science, but it gives us more information to usually persuade clients that we're right. Anyway, so this in combination on this neuromarketing, in combination with eye tracking, it gave responses to where people were looking and the sort of EEG response to what they were looking at. So they looked at 4 different email layouts for Betfair, which is, I have an ethical issue with gambling, but that's another story. And it told, actually, in this example, it tells us a lot of things that we sort of already knew. When you see someone's face, you're more emotionally engaged than you were in the rest of the advert. Yeah. This is Marshall McLuhan. This goes back decades. But when we start to look in, combining it with eye tracking, we can see how to drag people's eye across the page, and we can start to quantify emotional engagement and conversion and click-through. And there's now a whole realm of things that have been informed with neuro insights called, well, roughly called neurodesign. And it changes things like the Campbell's soup tin to the one that you see on the right. And it's often called the new frontier of packaging and product design. However, my last book chapter was on quantifying value mechanics. I do lots of commercial work as well as being an academic, but I'm ethically interested in value, and I'm interested in different cultures and where they see value. So when I'm trying to measure value mechanics, I started looking at what was wrong with user-generated content. There's lots of stuff, as I'm sure you come across on the internet, talking about the user-generated thing is this new diplomatic everything for everybody accessibility. Total bollocks, actually. Here's an example. This is your brand-centric product. That's your customer-centric product. What's wrong with user-generated content from a commercial point of view? Well, the point is, where does the value lie in this product? Where is the value in this product? As designers, as people who've lived in the UK for a while, I don't know, whatever, we sort of know this. It's not in the tomatoes, it's not in the ketchup, it's not in that, it's in that. That's where all the commercial value is for that brand. Why they need like loads of technology and geniuses to tell them that, I do not know. But this starts to become difficult when you take it into this context. When Netflix and Spotify first went live, nobody wanted anything, because the digital transformation of the value chain had not occurred. For example, you need to make it really hard to get hold of the director's cut of certain movies in your build. You need, sorry, that one, the director's cut. In this one, you need to emulate hunting for that bootleg red vinyl. These are the value chains of these industries. I'm not interested in disruptors. For me, disruptors are badly designed transformers. I'm interested in transformation, and I work on a lot of public sector issues where things like this, it's not about making money, it's about ensuring that the value chain is transformed into the digital build. So we did a lot of work using the biometrics to measure the branded user experience. If you've got multiple touch points across a diverse range of digital outlets, some of them will give your consumer that branded UX and make them want to purchase, and some of them won't. Like the programmatic advertising that doesn't know that you've booked your holiday or bought your shoes. This is brand damaging. So from a commercial point of view, it's not always a good idea, to be frank. So we started looking at how you measure a branded user experience across multiple touch points. And I worked on something looking at mass customization for high-end handbags, where we tried to quantify where the emotional engagement with the customers existed within the products, so we knew what to not let them change. And again, it's a bit of a no-brainer. Mulberry handbags, for anyone who's aware of, I wasn't until this, but they use an ostrich skin. Consumers are attached to the ostrich skin. Don't lose the ostrich skin. They're also attached to the notion of queuing for a mulberry or being invited to queue for a mulberry. So that needs to go into the build. People need to be publicly online invited to queue for a mulberry to embed the value chain of £4,000 handbags into the digital experience. Because if you don't and you use an Argos back end, there ain't nobody paying £4,000 for your handbag. Okay. So not that I'm feeling a bit crap after what you've been on about, but the point being, this is commercial work for commercial clients, but it leads on to lots of other things. So yes, looking at multi-touch point UX, which I've just sort of covered. And so we came up with the notion that the dual process idea of System 1 and System 2 cognition, we do dual process testing. So we'd go through the normal cognitive functionality, content, usability, the HCI side, but then we'd also do the emotional side, and we'd test for branded engagement, satisfaction and enjoyment using all our biometrics. So we could measure people's emotional responses to the experience across multiple touch points. Then we did something even more complex, and we started using all sorts. EEG, eye tracking, facial recognition, galvanic skin response, heart rate monitoring, eye tracking, to measure people when they were in game. Now, when people are playing computer games, they're really immersed and really viscerally engaged. So it's a fascinating area for user research. The data that we got is basically about emotional states and different types of brain waves. And we started to map the sort of clusters of signals around different emotional states. So we're now starting to quantify, and I'm using this loosely because I'm not a scientist, and I do speak to lots of scientists, so I have a habit of saying that a lot. We're starting to loosely quantify types of signals that tell us how people might be feeling at different points. I then went on to do something which I called measuring the cognitive UX. It was a MOOC, an online learning free tool. And they'd only come up with the idea really of creating an archive of materials. An archive of materials does not cause people to learn. I can walk through a library and learn absolutely nothing, can't I? It's not the point, is it? So the point is the engagement. And what do you do when the human being isn't there to engage those people? So they came up, it was a massive multi-country research project across the US and Australia and UK. And they came down to this idea that at the core of learning is something called Faccioni's 6-stage model of critical thinking. And apparently this is like a core mechanic of what causes us to learn. I'm not an expert in learning, but these people were. So I thought, well, if this is the core mechanic of what causes us to learn, why don't we have it as the core mechanic of the system that's trying to teach people? So we built it. We built Faccioni's 6-stage model of critical thinking as what I would call a cognitive architecture. And we drove the users through it at every stage, whenever they were supposed to be learning about any given material. And so we nudged them through a process of critical thought. And we wired them up to make sure that their response state was working effective. Because when you watch television, I don't know if you know this, you're in an alpha state. So you're open to suggestion, which is why advertising works. So if you want to really change somebody's cognition, somebody's neural activity, you want to teach them something, you need to get them into an alpha state. So we tried to build something that got people, and we tested it in the development cycle. Yes, this creates an alpha state, and then we start nudging them through critical thinking. So if we can do this to nudge people through critical thinking, and this is R&D, so it maybe even 5 years it'll be common on the market, what else can we persuade people to do? And the answer is anything. So I've been looking at, and part of my life's work actually is to quantify levels of engagement. If I get my way, there will be an emotion recognition act, and we will be able to quantify engagement, persuasion, nudge, coercion, and addiction in systems. And you'll have to consent to persuasive systems, and obviously coercive systems won't be allowed. So and addictive systems, gambling, they're addictive systems, a lot of machine-based gambling. So I started looking at what I thought of as a nudge interface. And this is now quite old, but we used EEG to demonstrate that if we created a placebo that looked like a packet of cigarettes, we got a deep, this is because I used to smoke Benson & Hedges, by the way. This was actually 30 years ago, but I'm still not over it. So anyway, we were talking about a stop smoking app, and the guy showed me what they were doing. I haven't got my phone, but and it was just like the landing page was like that box that you pull, that leaflet you pull out of a box of pills. It was just tons of information. I said to him, have you ever smoked? And he went, no. I went, right, get out of the way, man. You have no idea. It's like, at that moment, I need a fag. So I started exploring this instinctive idea of my relationship with my fags, and the fact that my iPhone was nearly the same size as 10 fags. Anyway, to cut a very long story short, intervention in the craving with a placebo packet of cigarettes showed a greater level of emotional engagement with the branded pack than the non-branded pack, and an exponential gain in the smoking cessation user journey as a result of the brand. Oh. Yeah. So we've got quantified. I nearly cried when this came in. This took me like 25 years to do this. But effectively, we've got quantifiable evidence that the branding of something creates a greater level of engagement, which impacts on behaviour. And that's what user experience is. We're changing mental models about things and changing the way that people behave, whether we like it or not. In fact, I think there's a slide missing. I was going to talk about, Actually, on the gameplay thing, we found that peaks and troughs in attention span had as a correlation to a game's Metacritic score. So I don't know if you're a gamer, but the Metacritic score is usually like a rating of a computer game. And we started to measure and find correlations between attention span and emotional engagement and the Metacritic score of the product. So again, it's all turning into very valuable commercial research. So what I'm working on now is Internet of Things and the fog. You know about the fog? It's the new cloud. It is. It's an immersive, what we used to call pervasive computing and ubiquitous computing, when things are in the environment all around you. I'm leading on a 5G testbed project, and all my work is concerned with 5G UX design. We are looking at a situation where a 5G signal would allow all the latent computing power in the room to be dragged into different functionalities. Like you've all got laptops and phones in your bags, and that's just sitting here doing nothing. So for Internet of Things, it starts to become very interesting. But this is the model that's currently floating around from the big developers. You know, the cloud, the routers, the neighborhood, the gateway, the building. The end point is the thing. There's no fucking people in it. Again, the end point of the Internet of Things is not the thing, it's us. So, in fact, it's us through an interface. So we're in it. But the point is, no one's given, again, any consideration whatsoever to the human impact, the individual impact, and the social and cultural impact of any of the stuff that we're going to be going live with. In fact, what we'll be looking at, and the stuff I'm working on, is a real-time connective and responsive feedback loop powered by an intelligent architecture. So this starts to become really, really ethically dubious in the wrong hands. So I think all I'm trying to say is, we are looking at a situation where much, much more will be going to market than what we're already worried about, but that those of us who are involved in research are concerned about these things. In fact, if Cambridge Analytica signed a contract saying they were not using that data for commercial purposes, it's Cambridge University that are at fault, to be frank. Because we work with commercial spin-offs, we work in commercial partnerships. Yeah, all universities do. That's how we get research money. But we're not allowed to create a spin-off. Like I work on NHS projects. I can't go, oh, get in, and go and flog something to the NHS for £1 million. You know, I mean, what sort of moron? It's unethical. In fact, it doesn't even have to be unethical, it's illegal. So if that's what's happened, I am leading on a data privacy ethics and nudge lab at the University of Brighton. And so you will be hearing more from us. And we also have a creative methods lab where we are working with businesses and investigating much more of the biometric interaction stuff. Is that good? Bad?
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, I have a really good time. Yeah, I was really poor for ages and then I got really successful. But I want to say this as well, yeah, I've never, ever, ever put anything on a public network drive that's not for public consumption. So what I'm sharing here and now, I will share on the internet. But nobody knows anything about me kids or anything. I do get a bit political sometimes, but I think that's my right. And I feel it's important too. But that's, again, for public consumption. I do it because it's public. So I think there's something really worth bearing in mind. The businesses. The businesses. Dum. Oh yeah, if there's any questions.
Okay, we do have time for some questions.
Don't all rush at once.
Is there any point at which you're pushing stuff forward in an academic kind of sense or professionally where you think, actually I'm making something that could speed up the potential for misuse?
Well, yeah, all the time. I had this, I've had it all my career. I've been in digital for 25 years. So for me, the reason I'm not very wealthy and I step in and out of industry is because I pick and choose what I do, because my life's work is about ethical issues in and around the media, and that predates digital. I've always had that. But I have worked with people, for example, we had a job with Sky B for product placement and stuff, and my colleague wouldn't work on it, and I did work on it. So it's actually down to individual choices, but it's a bit like splitting the atom. Yeah. Really. It is like splitting the atom. But then you think, 10 years ago, I thought, well, if I don't split the atom and take some moral responsibility as best I can, the next person will. Which is not me trying to be glib, but I can't not do what I do because there may be negative outcomes. I want to be the person who who is armed to try and do something about those negative outcomes. That's why I'm an academic.
I think one of the fundamental issues is that digital really hasn't had its Oppenheimer moment.
No.
It hasn't had its atomic bomb moment.
No.
Engineering, traditional engineering has.
Yeah.
Physics has.
Yeah.
We haven't yet.
No, we are well on the way.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I have been saying for a decade that we'll look back and see some sort of mediated decimation of almost everything to a great extent, but I do have faith in humanity. I'm not about to go and, jump off a cliff. There are ways through this. There has to be ways through it, because we certainly can't go round it or backwards. So,
Why do you think GDPR became a thing?
Well, I think I'm actually working with the UK government at the minute, and there is this actually really old-fashioned thing about what's cricket and what's not. If that doesn't sound utterly fucking ludicrous, but there really is. There really is, and it's like, this is not all right, and we're going to lead the world in saying it's not all right. And that's bloody brilliant. So I think the fact that we're starting to move into a realm where we're starting to discuss, but I've already noticed people are just adding to the cookie statement. There's just an extra bit on the bottom of the cookie statement, so it ain't going to make that much difference. But I knew about 5 years ago, for example, that eBay was speeding things up slowing things down for people in the Scandinavian and German countries, because they need to feel as a culture that they've achieved something, whereas the UK want it fast. So this has been going on for ages. And when it comes to healthcare and stuff, cross-referencing data is really important. Really, really important. So we're working, as I said before, with the NHS, trying to look at pseudonymisation and then reappropriation, which allows us to pseudonymise the data. Do you know about that? You sort of anonymise it, but you keep the patterns so that you can reappropriate it to groups of people again after, because you can then predict that somebody might need diabetes intervention, or we've got stuff, chronic pulmonary disease, hospital admissions increase in line with the weather, and the fastest way to predict and intervene on that is through data. So there's a lot of really good outcomes that are possible. Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's any kind of projects or work that you've turned down just because you feel ethically opposed to it, or whether your position is like, I can make an influence positively in that situation.
No, it's not always. I had a bit of a freak out recently, and I don't know if I'm supposed to tell you this, but I was asked to work on smart vehicles for soldiers. And it's something that bothers me greatly, because when a soldier's under fire, those jeeps with like 3 screens in the front, they have to pull over to read the screens. Now, this to me is absolutely horrific, that the computation, the user experience for that soldier is so fucking poor. Somebody's trying to kill him and he has to pull over to read a screen. And I'm saying him, maybe it's a girl. Anyway, and I was like, okay, I'll work on that, because it's vehicles. And then I realised I had to get clearance for Defence Science and Technology Laboratory. And when I was a hunt saboteur, that was Porton down bloody Torture Town. And I thought, I can't do it. I can't do it because I'm still who I was. And that's Porton down Torture Town, where they drip stuff in rabbits' eyes and all that. So yeah, for my friend, it was Rupert Murdoch and B. Sky B. Yeah.
Can I follow it up with just like, I'm guessing you work with like other people that have very different views to you. How do you deal with that, where there's someone that might be completely fine with going with one project where you're not? Like, how do you
Yeah.
deal with that?
Well, I tend to be lucky enough to move in very professional circles. I work with people who just hate technologists, full stop. I'm in a university. There's plenty of people who just have massive stereotypes about who I am and what I must be about. I also drive a diesel 4x4. I work at the University of Brighton. There's not many female technologists who drive diesel 4x4s at the University of Brighton. But I don't know. I'm a big girl.